Many believe magic has maintained order in Quel'Thalas. My bow would say otherwise. One shot, one kill. This is how I preserve our realm. I am Illyria Windrunner. If you stand against me, you're just another target. And I never miss my mark.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hearthstone Championship Tour, America's Winter Preliminary. We're not even halfway through the day, and this is the first day of a weekend filled with action-packed card slinging action. Next matchup is going to be between Coglorin and Muzzy, and joining me on the desk to bring you that action, of course, is Raven and Cora. Raven, we got a chance to look at their deck lists during the break, and we talked about it a little bit. What do you think, looking at those guys' deck lineups?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually because they're both playing the same classes across the board. So that's a pretty cool thing to see how the mirrors matches potentially line up, and even if the archetypes within those classes are the same. So it's gonna be really cool to see, especially because I think there's like Warlock in the list. So
yeah.
See whether we saw some more like Handlock variants, or whether Reno Lock's going to be on there, or Zoo. So it's going to be good just to see how each player is really approaching their lineup overall.
Yeah, and Cora, Coglorin, he's a Brazilian player. You said you've seen him in a few opens. What else do you know about this guy?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very prevalent open player. I think I've competed against him a couple times. I know he was just fell short of the America's Championship last year, I believe.
Yeah.
Molagel and Correa ended up getting into the tournament, but he was, I believe, top 4. He is Brazilian. I believe him and Leo Main are the top 2 Brazilian players in the Hearthstone scene, so it's going to be exciting to see him actually get to have the spotlight for once.
Yeah, and actually his Brazilian friend Correa, who was a representative for the Americas last year at the Americas Championship, has fallen out of the tournament, already lost twice. So he's seeing his comrades, his fall on the Hearthstone battlefield.
At least they'll be rooting for him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if anyone's knocked out, it's definitely
or they'll be bitter.
How negative of you?
Yeah,
how negative?
I'm sorry.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah, but he'll be going up against Muzzy, who is a player who, sort of flies under the radar a lot of the times. He's a player that plays for Hearthlytics, which is, they're a growing team, but they're not considered one of the higher echelons, like the G2 or the Na'Vi. But they definitely have some solid players. Of course, Frozen, his teammate, finished rank 1 legend last season. So who is Muzzy? What do you know about this guy, Cora?
I mean, he's another one of those players who, like you said, a little bit under the radar, but everybody who plays competitive Hearthstone, who ladders, has run into him and has probably lost to him at one point or another. He is a very accomplished ladder player. We've seen some tournament success from him, and I think you actually said that you're decent friends with the guy. You do some prep with him, and you might know a little bit more about his decks than you should at this point. But
TJ's friends with everyone, though, right?
Yeah.
TJ's just a nice guy.
I was practicing a little bit with him with his decks and a bunch of other people that were playing with the American Winter Preliminary. So I sort of know what deck lineups he's bringing. I hope that he locked in the Control Warrior deck. The one
that you're touting that Raven just can't quite.
Yeah, this is just to show me this deck can actually win.
Yeah. But Coglorin, he's a player. We don't really know too much about what type of decks he brings. The last time I saw him play was in the Copa America, one of the Brazilian tournaments, and he's all over the place. He plays tier 1 decks. He plays what's the best. So we'll have to see how he's going to do. But make sure you guys are staying engaged on social media throughout the day. We have a lot of exciting matches left to come. We saw Dan update earlier on some of the pro players that are making it through. So it's not quite like the blood-shedding field of
these more EU jokes.
The pro players smacked down.
Like how my eye contact went right to you.
It's not like the EU event.
Yeah, so head on Twitter, use the hashtag HCT. As you can see across the screen in the last couple matches, we've been featuring some tweets. So send us pictures. How are you watching the Hearthstone Championship Tour, and how will you continue to watch the Hearthstone Championship Tour throughout the year? So make sure you're letting us know. But it looks like we're moments away from jumping into this match. So we saw the decks earlier. Both players are bringing Zoo, and we talked about Zoo a little bit earlier. And I think or both players are bringing Warlock, and we talked about Zoo a little bit earlier. And we talked about, EU versus the NA Warlock. Cora, I want to get your opinion on the different Zoo decks.
So you get the deciding vote.
Yeah. So there's
gosh.
There's the Doom Guards version, And then there's the version that runs Sea Giant with no Doom Guards and
Yeah.
runs Leroy Jenkins as a finisher.
I mean, I haven't played the Leroy Jenkins version. I've played Sea Giant in my Zoo decks. I'm a big Zoo player. People say it's not a lot of skill. I like to think otherwise. I don't know if I'm the most skilled Zoo player, but it's definitely a great deck to ladder with, and it's a great deck to bring into tournaments. Very consistent and very good against the Druids, which pretty much everybody will be bringing at this point. We can, see from the matches that we've casted so far, just a ton of Druids. So Zoo is very consistent. I'm partial to the Doom Guard. If it's not nostalgia factor, it's just that 7 health can be really, really helpful. I do like Sea Giant, though. I can see why people are bringing Sea Giant.
Yeah.
But you know what? I used to play a lot of Hunter, and Leroy Jenkins was a favorite. So I can see how both would work. I would need to test the Leroy list a little bit. I'm going to have to give my vote to Doom Guard at this point.
All right.
Good job sitting on the fence a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like,
Nobody
I
can
like both
criticize me
lists,
now.
So,
All right. Well,
Yeah.
let's get to the real meat of things here. Both players have banned out Warrior.
so further proving that the Warrior won't take a win in this set.
Oh man, that's a shame. The rest of the lineups are actually, I believe, identical as far as classes go. We don't know what types of decks they're using, but they're identical as far as classes go. So that means they both sort of have the same game plan. You think that's true? I mean, they both come with the same class lineups. They both ban Warrior. Is that a coincidence or?
Yeah, I think if you look at the lineups overall, even whether it's Patron or Control, Warrior can do pretty well versus Paladin generally, especially if it's Patron, it's versus Druid and Zoo. It's also really good. So you're almost forced into a ban, and that's something you have to be really aware of when you're making lineups. It's like if someone brings like Class A. Like, regardless of everything else, I just have to ban that class because it's just so powerful. You have to hopefully ban out the one class that you're weak to and then hope that you can do the rest there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like this lineup, we can see they're bringing identical class archetypes, and it's because these are 4 of the most consistent ladder decks and tournament decks at the moment. Very definitely comfort picks, but Coglorin being from Latin America, we might see something like a mid-range Paladin, something that maybe we wouldn't expect in, actually in the United States or in Canada, but that might, maybe catch Muzzy by surprise. Maybe he won't be expecting it and could give Coglorin a bit of an edge.
Yeah, and Muzzy is a player that I don't think is surprised by too much. Muzzy has the highest average ladder finish across the 2 months that counted for this season. Out of any player that's playing. He finished top 10 in both, 3 in December and 5 in January. So he just missed that cutoff. And he's a player that I see in all sorts of opens. He's a full-time student as well, so he balances a lot of that. So he's not really surprised by too much because he experiences all of the realms of competitive play. High-level ladder, probably at the beginning of the season, low-level ladder. and he competes in small as well as big tournaments, like HPL last year. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how he falls.
I think it's something to be said as well, like the sort of lesser known players versus the bigger names. Much harder to find information on the lesser known players. So being able to just give research, even though there's a lot of players and you don't know who you're going to face in the bracket until the day, you definitely, people like Muzzy or even some of the large names like Tide of Time, most players that are really into the scene will have an idea of how these guys play and what sorts of deck lists they're going to take. Whereas on the flip side, the sort of big pros are just like, probably won't have the information or even be able to find the information in terms of what deck lists they prefer and what they actually run. So there is a certain level of advantage there to a certain aspect.
Yeah, well, we are still trying to sort out some issues with the next match. So we're going to have to go to a quick break before we jump to that match. But during the break, you can listen to Ben Brode talk about one of his favorite things in the world, Hearthstone.
Greetings. My name is Ben Brode. I'm one of the designers on Hearthstone. And we have something that I'm pretty excited to announce today. Recently, we've talked a lot about some of the problems that we see coming down the road for Hearthstone. Things like how it's getting more and more daunting for new players to jump into the game. And also that the cards that we design have to compete with more and more cards, making it harder and harder for us to really shake up the metagame when we release new content. So we've been brainstorming some ideas for how to solve these problems. And we're excited to announce that we're going to add a new way to play, a new format to Hearthstone. And we're calling it Standard. And in Standard, you can play with basically anything from the last 2 years of sets, plus basic or classic cards. And every year, when we release the first expansion of that year, we're going to reset the format and remove anything that is over 2 years old at that time. Because that's kind of a big deal, we're going to celebrate it in the game by tying it to the Hearthstone Zodiac, and the first year of Standard will be the Year of the Kraken. And because there's a smaller subset of the total card pool in Standard, when we release new sets, it's going to make a much bigger splash there because it'll just be a bigger percentage of that environment. So if you like a metagame that shifts more frequently, I think you're really going to like Standard. Also, it'll be a great place for new players to jump in because they won't feel like they have to collect every card ever made. So I think Standard's going to be just a really awesome new way to play Hearthstone. But right now, you're playing with every card ever made. And that's still going to be true. We're just going to make that one of the two formats in Hearthstone. And we're going to call that format where you can play any card Wild. Because eventually there'll be tons of cards, and it's going to get a little bit crazy. But whether you want to play Wild or Standard or both, you're probably going to want lots of new decks to explore. So we're going to increase the number of deck slots from 9 to 18. We're going to add a whole new page. So I'm sure you have tons of questions about the new format and how it affects esports and things like that. So we've created a great blog for you to check out. Also an FAQ, it's got tons of information there. Or you can just hit us up on Twitter at PlayHearthstone, and we'll be happy to get back to you with any questions you have. So thanks for watching the video. I'm super excited about the future of Hearthstone, and I'll see you online.
We are hope.
We are honor.
We are courage.
We are justice.
We are compassion. We are determination.
We are harmony. We are Overwatch. Rated T for Teen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back once again to the Hearthstone Championship Tour, America's Winter Preliminary. I'm TJ once again for the third time in the row, joined on the desk by Raven and Cora. I think this time we are finally going to get to cast a game.
Third time's charm.
Third time's a charm.
Oh, you just can't get rid of us.
Yeah.
One or
We're
the
not
other.
going anywhere.
Yeah, keep trying to get them off the desk, but they just keep coming back. But yeah, the next matchup is going to be between Muzzy from Team Hearthlytics and Coglorin, who's one of the highest ranked and rated Brazilian players in the scene. So we have their deck bans, and you can see on your screen there, Warrior ban for both players, and we have their classes ready, and all three of their classes, are exactly the same. So we should be moments away from jumping in. Raven, I'm going to ask you one more time. Who has the advantage when both players have the exact same lineup?
It is actually going to depend a certain amount on the way probably the Warlocks are built, actually.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to give you a serious answer as opposed to what I think you're expecting.
Yeah.
So now that we're actually into the game, we can see that both players are very likely to be playing Zoo, and both have pretty okay openings. I mean, like, Cora, you said you're a fan of Sea Giant.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a Sea Giant
She's a fan
right
of
here.
everything.
I just like it all.
Do you like keeping Sea Giant in this opening? Because I know this is something we actually discussed a little bit earlier today.
Absolutely, and I think you said, it was either you or TJ said that you keep Sea Giant every time you play the mirror.
Every time.
Every single time, and it always works out. And you can see Coglorin's got 2 1-drops, 2 2-drops. Muzzy also has a great curve, and he's going to be able to play that Sea Giant so much earlier than an 8-8 should be played. It is just phenomenal in the mirror.
The thing is that conversation originated when I was actually on a call with Muzzy.
Really?
So I was trying to learn the new Zoo, the Sea Giant Zoo with no Doom Guard. I was trying to learn it. I was like, Sea Giant seems so strong. As soon as Sea Giant hits the board, it feels like I win the game.
Yep.
And Muzzy's like, yeah. He said, in mirror matchups, keep it in the mulligan. And I was like, okay. And ever since then, I keep it in the mulligan, and I rarely lose to the standard version of Zoo with Zoomguard, which it seems like Coglorin is running. So we'll have to see if that's going to be the case this time, because Muzzy kept it.
He does have that Sea Giant, but Coglorin also has had a really nice opening, able to clear off that Imp King boss relatively easy, and going to break himself into Rubian out of that egg.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good. The only downside I would say was the Dark Peddler wasn't the most amazing choice of cards I've ever seen. When you pick Young Priestess, I mean, I've seen that card do some work, actually.
I'm flashing back to like Reynad Zoo with the Young Priestess and like the Clerics. Like, it's not bad.
Yeah, I think he definitely wanted like the power of Whelming, but what the good position here is that he's got so much damage represented on the board. It's one of those few opportunities where if the Sea Giant does come down soon, he does actually have a lot there to actually just take it off the board, because you do need to remove it. The second that gets Defender of Argus, it's a big wall to try and get through.
Absolutely, and Coglorin does have the Abusive Sergeant in hand, so if his board stays present, he's actually going to be able to clear off that Sea Giant relatively easily, like you said, which isn't what you want to happen when you play that minion down. You want to taunt it up, you want to make it even bigger and hit face with it, so your opponent is the one that constantly has to deal with the pressure.
Yeah, the thing is with Sea Giant, sometimes you have to do some complicated math, which is something that Zoo players sometimes don't have too much experience with.
Are you trying to insinuate Zoo is an easy deck where you just go face?
TJ, I don't like that.
No. No, actually, Zoo is one of the more complex decks to play because minion positioning matters. When to go face, when to trade, those types of things are playing a huge factor in the outcome of these matches. So I say it as a joke, but I want to be clear. I do think that Zoo is a pretty complex deck to master.
Yeah, and we see the sort of the effect the Sea Giant has in this matchup, where because both decks in the mirror want to or have to build the board to actually win the game, as they don't really run any burn or direct removal. Like, even if your opponent's clearing minions off your board, they're still throwing a lot more on their side as well, and the Sea Giant does affect from all of the minions on the board, not just your own.
Yeah. Now, one thing to note is there might be a situation where Sea Giant was not a good choice. I said I keep it a lot, but there are some situations where you don't have a good curve before the Sea Giant. And we see this with Muzzy. He actually threw away a lot and kept the Sea Giant. He didn't have the Imp Gang boss, which is one of the cards that makes it strong. He didn't have the Implosion, which is another one of the cards that makes it strong. His one-drops were a little late. You can see his Flame Imp's just coming in right now. So there might be a situation now where he just doesn't have time to play it because his curve wasn't good enough.
And you said this Young Priestess wasn't the best pickup from the Dark Peddler, but here it's going to clear off a Flame Imp. Maybe he'll probably keep it on the board, but it had the potential of clearing off the Flame Imp, and it's going to be buffing these minions one more time. Now a 4/5 Nerubian. I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I also said it would do some work as well sometimes. but yeah, the idea as well, like the additional 1 health actually makes like the mass more awkward. You're so used to dealing with like, okay, I need X damage to deal with this minion, and then you have to do like really funky trades to try and clear off. For example, this 4/5.
But Coglorin is just going to have lethal here. He's got the Doomguard coming down for 16 damage on board, and that's enough to, shut Muzzy out of this game relatively early.
Yeah, Raven is probably starting to question my game knowledge, because the two things that I've told him definitively so far since he arrived in America was that Control Warrior is the best deck, and the Sea Giant Zoo is better than the Doomguard Zoo. So
I'm feeling pretty good at the moment.
He's feeling pretty good.
To be fair, Leroy would have done the same thing as Doomguard there.
True, yeah, and he wouldn't have discarded cards and given
That's
up
true.
information.
Oh, no.
Okay. But yeah, that's a pretty quick win for Coglorin. And talked about the Sea Giant keeping the mulligan, but you got to keep it with a good curve. And Coglorin had one of the dream openings
Oh, it was great.
for Zoo players. And a lot of times the opening is what dictates the pace of the game in Zoo versus Mirrors, right?
Yeah, well, one of the at least positive things for Muzzy is that Coglorin lost his Warlock in the mirror, whereas Muzzy still has the potential of going Zoo versus Druid. So that could just be like, okay, well, if I get the Zoo versus Druid matchup, then it's not a guaranteed win, of course, but it's definitely favored. So he can be like, right, okay, I'll get that matchup, then hopefully the other lineups work out better.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely thinking, okay, I've got a favorable matchup. My Zoo's most likely going to get a win, and then he's going to be in the same position as Coglorin. And from there, it's, two of the same matchup. And, I mean, do you want to go 2 mirrors? What are you thinking is the best matchup for these guys?
Well, a lot of times, I know especially Muzzy, he's one of the players that doesn't really have a plan when he goes into his deck selection. A lot of players are like that. They say, you know what, just throw out a deck. Because especially in the early stages, it doesn't matter too much. You have to win with all your decks. There could be times where you dodge a really bad matchup. Like if you have Freeze Mage, you're trying to dodge Warrior. But other than that, it's a lot of times it's just throw at a deck, hope it wins, hope your preparation for creating your deck lineup is what's going to pull you through instead of your deck selection actually in the match. But looks like we're jumping into game number 2 here. Coglorin throwing out the Paladin, and Muzzy once again sticking with the Warlock.
The Secret Keeper just warms my heart.
It
just makes me happy.
Oh, yeah?
It just makes me happy. And I am sure I'm the only person saying that. Everybody in the audience is probably like, ugh, can we get rid of the Secret Keepers for once in our life? And I'm like, no, they're staying.
Looking at this Zoo list, though, so again, Sea Giant's definitely a card that will benefit from playing against Paladin.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
know, one, the natural ability of hero power, but also cards like Muster, and Paladin wanting to build up the board as much as possible because Challenger is a lot better when there's a board. But we do see that not the best opening hand for Muzzy, actually, whereas Coglorin's looking really good here.
Look at this. Okay, turn 1 Secret Keeper, turn 2 Noble Sacrifice Avenge, which are the 2 best secrets to play together, especially in the early game and especially against a deck like Zoo. And then he can coin into a 4-drop on turn 3. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Muzzy gave a little face there like, whoa. This is what I'm dealing with. He looks like being quite a bit of trouble. You know, in-game boss is one of those cards, though, that contests a lot of boards really well. And Paladin is one of those boards that in-game boss can do a lot of work for. He's got Power Overwhelming. He's got Dark Peddler, which can draw into Power Overwhelming or Abusive Sergeant. And in-game boss is almost always going to leave behind at least an imp.
Yeah, and I think the only sort of positive for Muzzy at the moment is that there's no Muster. Because one of the really good things when you've got just an Imp Gang Boss on the opposite side of the board is you can hit that and generate the 1/1 tokens, but then clear them up with the weapon. So it's really clean. So because he doesn't have that, it's going to be a little bit more awkward, but definitely having the secrets on board that are now going to avenge something. He's probably really hoping that goes on that Secret Keeper so that minion will just never die at all.
It's going to give Coglorin such an edge here. And I mean, that Shredder, just such a solid minion. The best 4-drop in the game at the moment. And we do see the Avenge going on to the Secret Keeper. A 6/3 1-drop. Dare I say the return of Undertaker days?
That's scary.
Yeah, you could, but don't.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. I don't want to give you nightmares.
Even as a Hunter player, I didn't particularly enjoy that phase.
This is a weird situation, though. It's not often where, as a Paladin player, you have Keeper of Oldemine in your hand, and using it on either of your creatures is a downgrade. And using it on any of your opponent's creatures gives them an upgrade. So it's his only turn 4, or it's his main turn 4 play, but it seems like he is going to go with the Shield of Minibot and Competitive Spirit because he realizes that Keeper of Oldemine is a liability no matter how he plays it.
Yeah, there was a small chance that you could think about maybe attacking him with the Secret Keeper to kill the 2/2, making it have 1 health, and then Oldemine it to go back to 3/3. Just because, you lose a lot of the attack, but you keep the minion alive and quite healthy so it doesn't, die as easily. So there is potential for that, but I think just a straightforward play there with the secondary Secret and the Minibot is pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And we see Voidwalker, Young Dragonhawk, and Corruption coming from Muzzy's Dark Peddler. Voidwalker, just the best of the 3. But it needs to be said, Young Dragonhawk with Power Overwhelming has some potential.
It's definitely a stylish way to end the game.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a rare pick, though. You have to have the perfect situation.
Oh, yeah.
Knowing that your Young Dragonhawk's going to live to see another turn is something that you can never truly count on. But one thing, Coglorin, it does seem like he's in the lead, but Zoo can do some pretty crazy things with the board, and Coglorin does not have the Mysterious Challenger yet. So since Muzzy had the first turn, he's going to be in a situation where his Dr. Boom comes down first, so he'll have a chance to react, given Coglorin doesn't draw into the Mysterious Challenger.
Yeah, and I think even if he does, it's not going to be the end of the world because we've already seen a good, good selection of secrets. Like, it's not going to bring in Competitive Spirit now, unless, Coglorin might be running 2, but the standard is to see 1.
Yeah.
So that's already gone. So the overall turn isn't as powerful as it normally is, but Coglorin's definitely, cashed in on the fact that that Secret Keeper makes having secrets so much better.
Yeah, likely the Mysterious Challenger would bring out just another Noble Sacrifice and Avenge, and potentially a Redemption.
Yeah.
Occasionally you see Repentance coming out of the Secret Paladin. It's not quite as likely, but it is a nice tech occasionally. Not quite as good against the Zoo deck, but we do see Dr. Boom in Muzzy's hand, so potentially if he top decks the Mysterious Challenger here, plays it out, could get a really nice Repentance on that Boom. It's all speculation at this point, but Coglorin's field is looking pretty solid at this point.
Yeah.
Muzzy does have the advantage, though, as playing the Zoo, where a lot of the time Secret Paladin actually just dries up a little bit in terms of cards and hand size, unless they play like a Divine Favor and then get a good one off. Whereas playing Zoo, you can, from like turn 5 onwards, you normally just freely tap, because you can tap, still use a lot of your cards because they're so low cost, and then just keep cycling through. And that, because he's not so far behind, that might actually be enough to just push out the game.
Yeah, just definitely abuse that hero power, get 2 cards per turn as opposed to the Paladin. But the Paladin has some really nice top decks. It also has some very weak ones. If he just picks up those secrets instead of the Mysterious Challenger or the Tyrion, potentially a Sludge Belcher or a Lotheb, he could shut out the game with those cards, but secrets or a Muster for Battle might not even be so effective in the coming turns.
Yeah, and there's even cards like Creeper, another Secret Keeper, you know, like just has such a low impact early on. So it could be rough. It is after this Dr. Boom gets gets cleared up, or
There's a Tyrion though.
There's
you
the
just
Tyrion.
draw into Tyrion and you're all good.
Yeah.
But-
Well, Secret Mysterious Challenger is sort of like a feast or famine type card, because if you don't draw it, you have more secrets in your deck that are not that great by themselves usually. And if you do draw it, it takes the secrets out of your deck, so you're more likely to draw into the things that are better.
Yeah.
And that's how Hearthstone works in general. You know, if you draw your good cards early, your lower cards early, you're more likely to draw into your bigger threats later. But Mysterious Challenger, you know, makes that even exponentially more effective because you're pulling so many cards out of your deck.
And we see the general answer to a Dr. Boom is just another Dr. Boom. And, you know, maybe the Boom Box will actually do more damage because, you know, Coglorin actually has got Golden One, whereas Muzzy's been a little bit slack, I think. Maybe he had both and he's already disenchanted the Golden One.
It's true, yeah. That's the first points of damage that Muzzy has managed to do to the face of Coglorin, and it came from a Boombot.
You know what? Better late than never.
Yeah, that's true.
Gonna go ahead and power overwhelming the egg. Probably run into the Keeper of Uldamon. It's worth saying if Coglorin had chosen to save the Keeper instead of using it on his own recruit, he would have had a really easy way of getting rid of that Dr. Boom.
Yeah, and this is going to be rough, so Muzzy's probably going to be forced into just trading the booms here and hoping what's left on board is going to be enough to power through. But I think this is actually still relatively close. The Tyrion's going to be really rough to deal with. I think that's going to be the stopping point. But
if Muzzy has an Owl in his deck, which the Zoos sometimes do tech 1, then it'll be I mean, he'll have 2 draws for it.
Yeah.
It's unlikely, but it would be huge at this moment in time. Without it, that Tyrion just...
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to soak up so much damage.
So this is a crucial moment right here. So Muzzy realizes that he's behind almost all aspects. He does have board, but he has to, you know, account for the boom bots. He looks like he wants to take a risky trade. And when you're in a situation where you have realized that you're falling so far behind, sometimes the risky play is the right one.
He decides not to.
Yeah.
I would have liked going a little bit greedy there. I understand why he chose not to. He doesn't know that there's a Tyrion coming out next turn. He might think, well, maybe he's got a handful of secrets and something useless. We know, unfortunately, that's not the case. If he had chosen to trade into the 3-2, it could have been that the Boombots couldn't have killed the Voidwalker, and, you know, the Dr. Boom would have gotten some great value. But this is rough. This is rough for Muzzy.
Muzzy looked like he felt physical pain when the Boombots killed his Lotheb.
So he needs the juggle to hit Tyrion and then a buff card to clear off. Probably wanted Abusive Sergeant.
Yeah, but the power overwhelming's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Or
mean,
Corruption. Wait a turn and hope that's enough, which it almost certainly won't be.
Try and bait your opponent into silencing their own Tyrion to get rid of the corruption.
I like it.
Yeah, that might be a play if Tyrion wasn't a 6/6 anyway. So it's definitely a little bit rough.
Still too good.
Yeah.
Or you could pick Zombie Chow and then do the old escape concede. It's an option.
Oh, and he might have heard you because that looks like it could be the play.
He got the knife, though.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
I think he wanted the extra juggle to try and pick off the Silverhand recruit.
Yeah.
He realizes that if he kills off Tyrion this turn, you know, that's just speeding up his death. Yeah, and that is going to be game. Muzzy doesn't find the juggle, and that means Coglorin is going up 2-0 in this series. So Muzzy's on sort of his last leg. This is an upper bracket match, so it's not an elimination match, but going down to the lower bracket is still a big deal. It's still pretty early in the day, so it means that they're going to have to fight through a lot. But we actually do have Frodan standing by. I know it's been a while since we've had some updates, since we had all those delays. But Dan is going to help us out with some updates from what's going on across the Americas.
It's been too long, TJ. I feel like we don't even know each other anymore, but I'll try to update you with every relevant information that I can. The first is to talk about who is moving on. So we do have Dear Jason, a player who did really well in 2014's America's Championship. He upset Silent Storm in the winner's bracket. Two Titans going at it. If you know their ladder players, you know their reputation's at stake if you're a pro player. But to some of the people, they don't really know them that well. But you should know that that was a pretty big deal. Another person that's been keeping attention of people is Phone Tap. He has dropped into the lower bracket pretty early on, being upset. Also, Kit Kats had to beat the Rat and push him into a lower bracket, and then the Rat ended up being eliminated straight afterwards. So there's a lot of movement in the brackets here and there, lots of cool stuff. The last one that I wrote down here was that Lucas, a player from Sao Paulo, did end up upsetting VLPS, sending him to the lower bracket. So even though we do see some established players and fan favorites moving on, we also have a handful of players who are up and coming and definitely challenging the throne. So let's give it back over to TJ, hear their thoughts on those match results, and get back to the games.
Thank you very much, Dan. Always great to hear from Dan,
of course.
Frodan, Joe. But we actually are still underway with one of the matches here. This is a third round match, upper bracket, between Muzzy and Coglorin. Coglorin is up 2-0, and he only has the Druid left remaining. So, Raven, what is Muzzy feeling like being in a situation where he has to beat a Druid 3 times in a row?
Yeah, it's definitely probably not one of the best decks you want to really face 3 times to definitely just not drop a game. But he does have some potentially good matchups. The Druid Mirror is probably going to be a mirror match in terms of mid-range Druid. I know we said that in the Chaki match, and then we saw aggro. So a few things might change there, but we are going to this game, which is Coglorin on the Druid and Muzzy with his Warlock. So this is one of the things where you know what they're actually going to pick when they've only got one deck left. So you just pick a good matchup, take the win, because, you know, why not at this point?
And look at Muzzy's hand right now. If you looked at his face when he drew this hand, he looked kind of surprised at first, but definitely happy. And you're thinking, this is an amazing hand. But then look at Coglorin's hand as well. He's got the ramp. He's got the Keeper of the Grove, which is so great at stopping those Flame Imps, a Knife Juggler, silencing an Egg, and then the Azure Drake to come out right after it.
Yeah. Muzzy was like, oh yeah, I do run these cards in my deck. It's been a while since I've seen them in my opening hand. But yeah, Coglorin. An Innervate is something that is also crucial to a Druid start to their early game against Zoo, because even if they do have the Wild Growth and Keeper, sometimes it's just not enough. They need that extra mile to be able to deal with the in-game boss too, and so usually
just deal with everything.
Yeah. But this is definitely a favored matchup for Zoo, so we'll have to see if Coglorin can fight the uphill battle. He's got that peace of mind knowing that he has 3 chances though.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough mulligan. You can consider getting rid of the Azure Drake. He decides to keep it and just go for the nice curve. And even that Force of Nature pick up there, actually pretty good against the Zoo deck, but you'll most likely just use it to clear off minions. And we see the Leroy Jenkins in Muzzy's hand. TJ, you were right.
Well, okay, so this deck that Muzzy's deck is based off of is from a popular Chinese player named Duke, who held rank 1 in January, December for quite a long time. It runs Leroy, it runs no Doom Guards, and it runs Enhancer Mechano, is usually what it is, with less 1-drops. But I know a lot of North American players have been experimenting with making the deck a little bit faster with more 1-drops, but still keeping that core of no Doom Guards, Leroy Jenkins as a finisher, but mostly still the same Zoo core with in-gang bosses and Flame Imps, Void Walkers as well. So a pretty cool deck. It's my favorite Zoo deck right now.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting whether Coglorin's actually expecting, you know, this specific one. The second you see Enhancer Mechano come out, it's always going to be a little bit worrying, but even Muzzy now, even having access to the second Imp Gang boss is pretty huge. He can either choose to just play that slightly off curve and then just generate so many tokens that then Gormok becomes playable. But it is going to just feel very off-curve, which it never feels too great, but I think it's too good of an opportunity, because this board just isn't really AoEable, at all.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward. He's definitely not unhappy about it, though. Think about if he'd had a Power Overwhelming in hand, though, how dominant his position would be right now.
Yeah. And then he'd even have the Gormok, too. You could tell Muzzy thought about playing the Gormok onto an empty board. It is more power immediately over an Imp Gang boss, but he realizes that, you know, with 2 Imp Gang bosses on the board and an egg, he's almost for sure going to have that activation, as Raven was sort of alluding to for the next turns. And having that board control with the Gormok is super important in the Druid matchup especially, I think.
Yeah, and Coglorin's got some options here. You can go like Azure Drake and then generate the 2/1/1s from the living roots just to put something on the board, because he needs to start controlling this, because already he's on 21 health, and that is scary. And as you said earlier, Corey, like if there's a Power Overwhelming in hand, then that becomes such a good trade for the Zoo player, and they get a 4/4 to deal with. And there's already a 4/4 in hand that's quite likely to come down next turn with the potential of double trade from the Gang Boss. That is a swipe though as well, so that's going to probably feel pretty good for next turn.
Yeah, one card that Zeus struggles with though is Dr. Boom. One card that
that players
pretty much
struggle
everybody
with.
struggles with.
that in a vacuum, Zeus struggles with the Dr. Boom. So, but they have to use a lot of resources to kill it off usually.
This is a really, really good Gorma. Clear off that Azure Drake very cleanly. Going to be able to clear off the other one with the 1/1 imps that came out of the Imp Gang boss. And he's still got an egg on board that he can use for activation. Doesn't have anything in hand right now, but with the light tap, it's likely that he'll draw an Abusive Sergeant, a Power Overwhelming, something that can make his board even stronger at this point. But we do see Dr. Boom in Coglorin's hand swipe to clear up those minions and innervate. If that wasn't enough, he's got Force of Nature for board clear, so...
Yeah, I think the tokens being able to trade into the 4/2 Drake as well was pretty off-putting for the swipe, because suddenly the swipe, like, it's good to kill the Gormok, but doesn't really do much else, whereas getting Boom on the board and then you just follow up with things like swipe into Shredder or something, which is such a swing for the Druid player here. As we can see, Muzzy's struggling a little bit. I mean, Argus is pretty good just to maybe get down that egg, just to force a proc, because he doesn't have Power Overwhelming yet. So that might do some work. But as we said, Boom's one of those cards, especially for Warlock, it's pretty difficult to deal with.
Especially, yeah. And, I mean, yeah, he can put himself in a decent board position at the end of this turn, but Boombots can do some terrible, terrible things.
It's not even can do. Boombots will do terrible things.
Yeah.
And he's got Taunt now buff on these 2 eggs, which is nice. It'll come 4/4s out of there. But, I mean, if the Boombot's cleared off, he's got Force of Nature. He's got the Dr. Boom. Yeah, I can't see this board sticking around.
Yeah, I think Muzzy's doing the correct play here of when someone plays Dr. Boom, you just need to close your eyes and pretend it doesn't exist. And just hope it's all a bad dream. But in terms of actually buffing up the eggs is really strong, because the odds on the Boombots doing that much work on this board is so small because of the 2 eggs potentially proccing 4/4s. And just going aggressive is actually really good because he has Leroy. Like, that's 6 damage out of nowhere, and unless, a big taunt comes up that you can't deal with, he even has the Owl. So, just pushing for that extra damage is really good, and you can see Muzzy potentially closing this game out pretty quick.
Yeah, and there's also a likelihood that modern Zoo players with Dark Peddler can get 3 Power Overwhelmings.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, since the Dark Peddler, of course,
good.
weighs class cards a little bit more. They never expect the old Leroy Jenkins triple Power Overwhelming from hand, so...
And also, if they were playing Bran, they could get even more.
They could, yeah.
That's true.
Well,
4 Power Overwhelmings. Oh, man. Coglorin is going to be able to silence off the egg with the most health, and then looks like he's just going to go ahead and swipe the Gormok, possibly clear off the 4/4, I would think.
It's a tough choice, this, isn't it? Because he does have Force of Nature, which could just potentially, along with Boom attacking again, just kill him next turn. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to trade and just hopefully just go for the win.
Okay, he chooses not to, but now if Muzzy draws Power Overwhelming, he's got 6, 10, 12, 16 with the 4 from PO. It will be 1 off now because Coglorin does decide to innervate Hero Power. That's a really smart move by him.
Yeah,
he can Hero Power into, say, like, oh, no, he won't have enough mana, right?
Oh, little late there.
Ooh. He's got to tap for something.
Yeah, but what does he even tap for? The Duke list that this list is sort of similar to runs Big Game Hunter.
Really?
But, I said a lot of American players tweak with it a little bit. They take the base. It's hard for a lot of people to put Big Game Hunter in Zoo deck and feel good about it.
Yeah.
But it does wonders. So maybe he does have that, but it's a one-of, if that, and okay.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I like this play though, because nothing he could tap for would actually impact the game in like as a whole. Whereas this is like, okay, if you don't win now, I'm going to destroy you next turn, because I still have Leroy.
He could have played the Leroy to clear off the Boom, but with that Savage Roar top deck, Coglorin is going to take this match a quick 3-0 over Muzzy.
Yeah. And that's a really impressive performance. We talked about how Correa, another Brazilian player, was eliminated earlier. So Coglorin sort of representing Brazil and to an extent representing South America, because this is the Americas Championship. There's players from Argentina. There's players from Chile. There's also players from Mexico. So there's a lot of different players from all over the place. I think the Toronto Fireside Gathering too, if we're going up to the north side of things, was the most populated. So it's really a team effort for the Americas coming across here. But you know what is Muzzy going to have to do to sort of get back into his positive psyche and move forward into this? He's not eliminated.
Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of experience in playing in opens on ladder, especially. So I think he just has to just put it out of his mind. But it's going to be really difficult because that was a pretty hard stump. I think a lot of the games just didn't go his way whatsoever, and that just always feels bad because you start to think about, okay, that just didn't go well, and is this going to happen again? Because if it happens again, then that's it.
Yeah.
And especially losing a matchup like Zoo versus Druid when his hand was so strong. He pretty much had everything he could have wanted, curved into Boom, but it just wasn't enough. The Druid basically did Druid things that we're not always happy to see, but Coglorin's probably really happy about it. With that early 3-0, Muzzy is going to have to find a way to muscle up some positivity to make it back into the game from the lower bracket.
Well, Muzzy's a pretty positive guy. He played Zoo in his ladder finishes where he finished top 10 a lot. So even if you get top 10, you still get used to losing. You still get used to having those bad draws. So I know he's not going to let him affect him too much. But Coglorin's strategy of bringing 3 popular and proven to be strong ladder decks seem to be a good strategy. Do you agree with this as we move forward into the tournament, Raven?
Yeah, I think there really is. I know we've discussed it a little bit before, where there's overall on a base level 2 strategies of either you just bring what the deemed best decks are overall, or you try and counter the meta and bring something to beat those decks. But these decks are the most popular and perform the best overall for a reason, and I think it's completely valid to be able to just I'm bringing these decks that perform consistently for the majority of the big players, and and they do some work, so it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, and Cora, you're a Secret Paladin advocate, so I don't know if you're comfortable with me calling you that live, but
people are gonna hate me. Thanks, TJ. No, I mean, how can you argue with a Secret Keeper that turns into a 9/3 from Secret Keeper, Noble Sacrifice, Avenge, Competitive Spirit? You hate it, but you can't deny that it's really, really strong. And
you only dislike it when you're on the
strong.
receiving end, though.
Exactly. When you're the one playing it, feels good, man.
Or in the mirror when your opponent draws slightly better than you. Then you can hate it too. But Muzzy will move down to the lower bracket. So we'll keep an eye on him as the day moves forward. And Coglorin will move up to keep going in the upper bracket. I think he's going on to round 4. So he's making his way through this tournament with a lot of steam. So we've seen a couple of the other players that have made it to the upper bracket. How do you think that ladder style is going to match up against some of these other deck lineups that we've seen that have Freeze Mage or decks where he won't be able to afford to ban Warrior?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because we've seen so far that, especially in that set, it's performed pretty well. You just take the good decks and just take the game there. But I think it might suffer a little bit if someone's actually brought lineups, similar to what Chaki was saying in his interview, that he's brought a lineup that he believes will beat something like Paladin or just the popular decks in general. If he faces someone like that, it could be really difficult because it's almost as if someone's teched their decks to beat you. So that's going to be one of the rough things. But if he can manage to dodge these players, he could go really far.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll have to check in up on Coglorin later as we see how far he makes the tournament. But in the meantime, let's once again head over to Frodan, who's standing by with some more juicy updates.
Thanks, TJ. That was way too long since we last talked, man. I still feel the empty void in my heart. But speaking of void, we have an update on some players. APX Void from Team Hearthlytics has advanced to round number 4 in the winner's bracket. He is also joined by Nostam and Kit Kats. Nostam had to beat Dart, a player that we brought up earlier from the Southern California region. Definitely some upsets, but also expected for some of these players. When you look at the list, overall the talent pool is enormous. You can't really expect to cruise into it, willing to just go ahead and beat everybody. It takes more than willpower. It takes a lot of preparation and a little bit of skill here. We also want to thank everybody who's been able to tune in. You guys have been sending awesome stuff. We do also recognize that people actually have been sending in their haikus. If you want to get them featured, continue to try and see your best if you can feature it by hashtagging the HTC. Tweet at us at Play Hearthstone and go to facebook.com/Hearthstone. Share us your other favorite moments as well. People are talking about casters and how they dress. They're talking about the games and their favorite decks. All kinds of things are fair play. Make sure, again, hashtag HCT. Unfortunately, we don't have an interview, but we do have another great game coming up right after this break. I'm Frodan, and when we return, more Hearthstone Championship Tour for the Americas Preliminaries. Stay tuned.
Greetings! My name is Ben Brode, and I have a topic I wanted to discuss because I did a video recently on the new player experience and power creep. And I read a lot of the comments on that video and noticed, well, first of all, some great suggestions for ways we can approach those problems, which I super appreciate. But also a comment that I saw again and again, which was, you talk a good talk, Brode, but then you go ahead and print Ice Rager and Evil Heckler and Dr. Boom, and those are strictly better than cards that already exist in the game. That's like direct power creep, and you didn't have to do that. So what's going on? I think that's a good point, and I wanted to discuss why we do that and what we were thinking. In order to do that, the first thing I wanted to note about all three of those comparisons is that all of them are cards in expansions that are better than a basic card. And that's an important distinction because for us, basic cards are in a really weird space. They're very different than every other card in the game because they have a lot more roles than every other card in the game. Basic cards are what we give you when you first start playing Hearthstone. It's our kind of introductory, welcome to Hearthstone, here's what card games are like. A lot of the people who come playing Hearthstone, they've never played a card game before, and it is somewhat daunting. And so we have to kind of ease in those players and then layer complexity and things like secrets and Wind Fury and triggered powers and things like that. We layer those things on in expansion content, in the classic set and in other sets beyond that. But the basic set, if you just read through the basic set cards, they are incredibly simple. They're cards like deal 6 damage, or taunt, or just what we call a vanilla minion, one that has no card text. And we keep those cards incredibly simple to be that very slow learning curve for new players. So that we have that very big burden of complexity for the basic set, for brand new players. So when you think about those new players, and if you imagine the perfect new player experience, what you want players to feel like, and how you want to layer all the different nuance of Hearthstone to them over time, one of the things that hooks players the most, and we see players playing the game and they're like, ooh, this seems really fun, I think I'll play more. The moments where they feel some form of progression. So the second that a player finishes the tutorial, plays a practice game, and then sees the XP bar fill, they're like, oh, you can level up? And it draws you into the game. You're like, there's goals now all of a sudden. You start feeling more powerful as you earn new cards. And that feeling of increasing in power is really compelling. And so if we start you off and your very first deck contains cards like Magma Rager, which for a while was had the distinct honor of being the very worst card in the game, and then you open up a new card, a better card in an expansion, you're like, oh, I'll take out Magma Rager, I'll put in this better card, I feel like just more powerful. I feel like I've increased in power and I'll do better. And that feeling, that emotional response to progression is super powerful and makes the game really fun. And, eventually there isn't as much of a feeling of progression as far as power. You progress through levels and earn golden cards. Once you've got enough cards to build a deck that you're excited about, you're just opening more options to build different kinds of decks. And that's cool, but that very beginning of your Hearthstone experience, that feeling of progression is pretty important. So we want some of the basic cards to be really bad, to help make that feeling of progression even stronger. But some people pointed out that those cards are actually making it unfair for new players. New players are losing because of that. And actually, new players are losing because they're for more reasons than just that. They just don't have the skill. There's a lot of things you have to learn about Hearthstone, from building a deck to the concepts of tempo and card advantage and value, and there's lots of pieces to becoming good at Hearthstone, understanding the meta, what your opponent might do next turn. So the cards in your deck actually are not the biggest reason why new players aren't winning a lot of games. But there's lots of basic cards that we give you, and you shouldn't be playing Magma Rager even if we did give it to you. Or even if we gave you Ice Rager or something, you probably shouldn't be playing it even as your first decks that you're building. We do give new players incredible cards. We give new players True Silver Champion, Fireball, Frostbolt, Flame Strike, Consecrate, and that's definitely intentional. We want players to have some great cards, and we want high-level decks to include basic cards also. So that's just because there are bad cards in the basic set doesn't mean that we're trying to make sure we give players really bad cards to start out with. That's not our intention. But we do also want them to feel a feeling of progression and to learn what cards I put in my deck, and there's some good choices, some bad choices, and some of them are obvious actually at the beginning of the new player experience, and that's important to have some obvious choices, because deck building is certainly not obvious to new players. When they get into the deck builder, it's there's a lot of cards, and deciding which 30 go into your deck, a lot of people do really badly. In fact, actually, when we did some analytics, new players who built their own decks did worse than if they just said, build me a random deck, and let that do it for them. They would end up winning more. So it's actually something that new players really struggle with, and we want to make that have some ways where you can learn how to do that better, just kind of hidden in the cards set when you're looking through your deck and trying to figure out what to add to it. And how this all relates to power creep is that when you see cards like Magma Rager and an Ice Rager, it looks like we just made a card that's strictly better, and so it's more powerful. Isn't that power creep? To me, it's not necessarily power creep. To me, you can tell if power creep is occurring if the decks that people are playing, if the meta gets more powerful. It's kind of the output of power creep, is that people are playing more powerful decks. So just because we made a card that's more powerful, if it doesn't get played in any decks in the meta, it actually had no effect on the overall power level of the game. And so I don't believe that cards like Ice Rager are actually do represent any actual power creep. Now, Dr. Boom is better than War Golem, and Dr. Boom actually does represent power creep. He is being played a lot in high-level decks, and you see him a lot, and so his existence has increased the power level of the game, but there's nothing to do with War Golem. War Golem could not exist, and he would still get played at high level in high level decks. War Golem is bad, and it's just because he's bad. It has nothing to do with Dr. Boom. They shouldn't necessarily be looked at through a lens together. Dr. Boom doesn't represent power creep because War Golem exists. War Golem is just bad and was never played, and so it wasn't like people took out War Golem for Dr. Boom. If you think about it, if we have a cool idea for a card, and it's a 3-mana 5/1, and it's got some benefit, it's like, got stealth or some other cool thing, the question is, should we be allowed to make that card? And I think the answer is yes. We should be able to explore new versions of basic cards because they're so bad. There's lots of room here to explore lots of other designs with those stats with some upside. And so just because we made Ice Rager or Evil Heckler, it doesn't actually mean that we are power creeping the game. Those new cards don't get played anyway. It's just that we're exploring new space. We're trying new card designs out, and it's okay that they're better than basic cards. Basic cards have a really specific role. They're really working at building the simplicity and progression feeling for new players. So anyway, I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into basic cards as to how we perceive basic cards, the role that we imagine they play for new players for Hearthstone, and how even though we make strictly better versions of those in expansions, it doesn't really necessarily represent power creep. I hope this is a good insight into the way we think about cards and basic cards and power creep, and I'm going to do some more videos soon that cover even crazier topics than basic cards. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.